younger, I think it's a good time to try to make a big push to get where you want to be.
Today's guest is the most recent addition to the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra bass section, and he was principal bass of the Louisville Orchestra for many years. Prior to winning this audition, which he did recently, we are chatting today with Bert Witzel, and I love talking to people who just won an audition because they've gone through a process. They've gotten from A to B. They've had setbacks along the way. They've figured things out. I just think it's a great time to connect with people, and it's a lot of fun. And I've been wanting to have Bert on the podcast anyway, so this was a good excuse to get him on. So we talked about his journey through the music world, the highs and lows of auditioning, and what Bert has learned in the process over the years. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did. And I want to give a shout out. Here are the top two: Colstein Music A440 Violin Shop, Modacity Steve Swan String Bass, The Bass Violin Shop, D'Addario Strings, and Upton Bass. Thanks for keeping the lights on here at the podcast. And let's dig into this conversation with Bert Witzel. So you got the Indianapolis job. Was this your first full season in Indianapolis this past season?
Well, the audition was in late September of 2018, and I started in March
So
because
you've only been there a few months then. Oh, cool. Okay.
That's right. Yeah, I had to do a trial week, and the music director had to be there, so it took a little bit, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. With Rufong and company.
Oh yeah, yep. Rufong and Brian, Peter, Bob, all those guys. Yeah.
That's great. That seems like such a great gig. That was one of those I remember hearing about Indianapolis and just like if you factor in everything, just being one of the most desirable places to play in an orchestra in terms of like salary and cost of living and the quality of orchestra and everything. It sounds like a great gig.
Oh, it's great. I'm loving it. It's like a dream. It's great.
Yeah.
The orchestra sounds great. It's just a great situation. So really thankful.
Yeah, and Indy's a cool town. I've always enjoyed going through there, and lots to do. Great bike trails too if you're into biking, and it's just I've always really enjoyed that place.
Totally, it's great.
Nice. Well, this is great. Thanks for chatting, man. This is fun. I wanted to chat with you before when you were so is it Louisville or Louisville? How you were there long enough? You can give me an education.
Yeah, people still say that they know that I'm not from there because I say Louisville, but apparently it's supposed to be two syllables. It's just supposed to be Louisville.
Louisville. Okay.
Apparently that's how it's supposed to go,
but you were there since 2004. Is that when you took the job there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I started there kind of in December of 2004. And was there for a long time. Yeah. Cool. That's good. So we can do this a whole bunch of different ways, but something, since you just got the indie job, something people love to hear about is just audition process and getting ready for the audition and what you did and what you've tried that works and doesn't work and setbacks along the way or anything like that. Maybe we could go back and just you grew up in the DC area. Is that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I was born and I grew up mainly in Annapolis, Maryland. And then when I was in high school, I moved to Baltimore. I attended the Baltimore School for the Arts, and I studied with Laurie Bennett and then also Rick Barber in the National Symphony kind of the last year in high school. Yeah.
And then Curtis for studies?
Right. Yep. I was at Curtis. I was at Curtis to study with Hal, and then Edgar Meyer came on to faculty about the last year that I was there. So I got to work with him a little bit. It was just like twice a semester or something, but it was great to meet him and have his input as well. but Hal is just amazing. He's such an amazing bass player and teacher, and he teaches by just like showing you how it's done. He just can he just can play anything, and yeah, it was really great.
Good place to be, and it's so cool that you were there when Edgar came in. What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 2005. I started a fifth year, but then left for Louisville. So it was kind of like I was supposed to graduate in 2004, but then just pushed it back. So yeah.
So you leaving Curtis, and I love hearing what this experience is like. Getting into an orchestra for the first time, and that was the principal position that you walked into, right? Okay, so what was it like? You're a student, and then all of a sudden you're principal bass of a full-time orchestra. What was surprising? What maybe would a younger Bert have been really surprised about? At Curtis. Just talk about that experience.
Well, I think anytime you go from a school setting to a professional setting, you're kind of dealing with a different dynamic, because there are people in the orchestra who like kind of all ages. There are people that are kind of at the end of their career or in the middle of their career, and then there are younger people that are like still auditioning and trying to get a job in another place, especially for the smaller orchestras, trying to move up. So it's just a different dynamic, and I think when you're in school, you're just totally focused on music. And when you have a job and you're in a job, and maybe you get married and have a family, and priorities change a little bit, and so I think there's just a lot of different dynamics, and getting used to that. And then as a principal too, it's kind of coming in as a young principal, and there are people there who have been in the section for a long time, and learning how to navigate those relationships it can be challenging, but it's also informative, and you learn along the way and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Any advice? Because this is something that now Dan Smith, who's not principal bass of San Francisco Symphony, but associate principal bass of San Francisco Symphony, or assistant, which is the second chair? I think it's associate, right? Sorry, Dan. I've had Dan on the podcast, but anyway, second chair. He's come in a young title chair person, and has just been so well received, and everybody loves him. But like you're saying, it can be super challenging. Like any advice for someone who's about to step into something with people that have been there decades? Any advice on how to be a good principal? I know it's a really deep topic.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's see. I think maybe over the years I've learned some of the kind of, maybe for me and for the section in Louisville, the most helpful things, or the best kind of positions to take. I think that kind of making limited comments to the section about things that are going on in music. If there's something really important that you feel really strongly about, I think it can be good to say something. If there's like some intonation issue, or if there's pizzicato is not together or something. But I think also just leading by example, just in your playing, approaching the job in a professional way, being really solid in coming in, not making mistakes, not miscounting rests and that kind of thing. It takes a lot of focus. But I think if you can kind of lead in your playing, and, make limited comments, and, just in general, just try to get along with your section mates and be a good citizen, I think all those things can really go a long way.
Yeah. You, a few years ago, came out with a scale and arpeggio book. Yeah. Talk about that, because it's on. You can get it through Amazon, and which is super cool. What inspired you to do that? Just talk about how that came to be.
Well, I started teaching a lot when I was in Louisville, and I had a number of students, and they were doing different things, like they had to do scales for school or for Allstate. And, I don't have a huge repertoire of educational materials, but the ones that I did, I was having trouble finding all of the scales that my students needed in one place, in one book. And I started to kind of compile my own scales with my own fingerings, and then I thought, well, maybe I should like make a book. I learned how to use Finale when I was in college, and so I was familiar with the program, and so I kind of started working on it, and it was kind of a fun little side project, and I think my students enjoyed it, and so yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, I'll bet. And I'll link up to that so folks can check it out. And it got mentioned or written about, I think, on orchestraexcerpts.com, this site, who I know, Michael O'Giblin, who puts that together. He and I've been on his podcast before. We've been friends over the years. So anyway.
Oh yeah, Mike's great.
Yeah. How did you meet Michael? When did you two get connected?
We met years ago at the Masterworks Festival. Up in Indiana, but which I think has since moved to South Carolina. So I've known him over the years, and he actually helped me put that book together. So really, really nice guy, really helpful.
How is it that Upton Bass came to design a bass for Gary Carr? Well, it all started with an email. Here's Eric and Gary from Upton Bass on how this happened.
Gary was at kind of the forefront of ergonomics in commissioning different bass makers to make ergonomic models to his playing style. And he basically replied. He said, yeah, but here's what I'm looking for. I want something, that's this, and this.
He sent us sketches.
Oh, and by the way, I want it affordable that anyone going to my car camp could afford it.
This model has become so popular, and Gary Carr even played it for the 50th anniversary International Society of Bassists convention. He was the opening, he gave the keynote speech, and he played two beautiful selections on his Upton Bass, his Carr model Upton Bass. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. What happens if strings aren't quite the right size for your instrument? For instance, if you play a 5/8 bass, when strings are slightly too large for an instrument, the tension will be lower. And when strings are slightly too high for an instrument, the tension will be higher. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass, which is home to the largest collection of double basses on the West Coast between Los Angeles and Canada. That's a lot of miles, folks. Steve's showroom is outstanding. Absolutely worth a visit. It's located just south of San Francisco Airport, SFO, and he has about 70 basses on display. And these basses range from student entry-level instruments all the way to the finest professional instruments. I've sent so many students and referred so many people to Steve's shop. He really does great work. And if you're looking for a bass, you're going to find one that suits your needs, your playing needs, and your budgetary needs for sure. SteveSwanStringBass.com is where you can go. And thank you, Steve, for sponsoring the podcast. Oh, cool. Yeah, no, shout out to Michael. And if people are looking for an interesting podcast about the orchestra world, I love his podcast, the Per Service Podcast. It reminds me of the conversations I would have backstage, like at break, just about different things, or in the car driving to a gig or that kind of thing.
Nice, totally.
I love chatting with people who've recently won a job, like I was saying, because it's just kind of it's fun to chat with people anytime. But you've really completed a process, and there's a whole lot of planning that goes behind that audition. And something that David Allen Moore asked me to ask people when I talk about auditions, so I'm gonna try to do that, is or maybe David didn't ask me. Well, anyway, I'll get to what David asked, but somebody asked me to ask this, is like the challenge of preparing for an audition when you're holding down a full-time job, because it's so different when you're in school and younger generally, and you have more flexible time, right? But then you get a job and you're and as principal, your bowings and all that kind of thing, and the hours and the concerts, and then as you get older, family responsibilities and all that kind of stuff, and it's just a different thing preparing for an audition. So how did you reconcile just the challenges of preparing for an audition while you're already established in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a number of things I'm thinking about. First of all, in Louisville, we didn't work in the summer that much. The season's a little bit shorter, so that did provide some time for me to be practicing every day and kind of get in, 4 or 5 hours a day, which when you're working is pretty difficult to do. But once September rolled around, we were working, so I had to be much smarter with my practice time. I think practice time is really precious when you're working, when you're doing other things, teaching, that kind of thing. So my focus was, in the practice time that I have, I really need to focus on the things that need work, and especially for the excerpts, I kind of feel like in each excerpt there's like 1 or 2 or 3 things that you really need to nail. Like, for instance, Beethoven 5 Scherzo, you really need to nail that A flat, right? The high A flat. If you can't do that shift, if it's not in tune, it's kind of like the audition committee is just going to be like, well, it sounded great, but he didn't get that, So I think if you focus on those things in each excerpt that are really important. Whether it be like a certain stroke or, a fast passage, or there's something, lyrical or whatever, then the other kind of secondary or further on down the line kind of issues you are kind of, you can kind of touch those up, or, that kind of thing. So.
Well, so this is a totally fascinating topic for me, and it's something that I'd love to. So okay, Beethoven 5, the example of you got to nail that high A flat, right? I went through with Brian Perry a couple years ago, but then also Orrin O'Brien, some of the standard rep and like what some of those moments are. So could we dig into a few of those excerpts that maybe you had to do for the Indianapolis audition, or just some in general, like what else was on that list, or what, especially some of the stuff that's more standard? We had Beethoven 5. What are another couple of those moments in Beethoven 5 for you that you just have to nail?
Yeah, I think, in Beethoven 5, I think, the A flat, at the beginning, the slurs, getting the slurs to really connect at pianissimo, I think is really important. And then, of course, when you go to the trio, it's all about the stroke, and, being able to do a really good, impressive stroke. Now, one of the interesting things was, in the final round, I was asked to perform that excerpt very fast. And so one of my thoughts was try doing different excerpts at different speeds, just in case that comes up. And it's funny because we all practice Beethoven 5 trio at like maybe like I think my metronome marking says 76 or something for auditions, but when you get to orchestra, it is always smoking fast. It's like 90 or 90. I mean, it's like almost unplayable. So I think having that experience, where I've played it multiple times at that tempo, it totally changes your stroke. It's no longer kind of a heavy heavy stroke. It's more of like almost on the string kind of stroke. So being able to adjust quickly in those circumstances, I think, is really important.
Yeah. What were some other excerpts, or if we go through another couple standard excerpts, like Brahms or Mozart or anything else that might have been on that list, or that you've thought about like that? What was that?
Yeah. Well, another one was Haydn 88. There was a few excerpts from the beginning, and then the kind of that one main excerpt in the last movement. And one of the things I noticed as I was recording myself playing those was it just sounded kind of slow. And so I thought, I really got to get this excerpt to where it sounds quick and impressive, and I can really execute it. And so that was one of the things, especially in the first movement, with the string crossings, being able to make that really pop. And I kind of changed my fingering, and I did something I never do, which is use third finger kind of down in third and fourth position, and just to make it so that it really popped, it really sounded impressive. And then the last movement too, with all the 16 notes, making all the notes come out at a quick tempo. That was one of the excerpts that I did have to play, and I felt pretty good about it. So.
Nice. Wow.
Yeah.
So you have this, and people love these details. So you had this summertime where you could get 4 or 5 hours or something like that, and then you get into the season and that time is compressed. And people ask all the time, like, how much technique am I practicing while I'm getting ready for an audition? Like abstract technique, sharpening the blade kind of stuff. How much just rep, recording, playing for other people? Like maybe how did that look for you in the summer when you had a little more time just in general, and then how did that look as you got into the fall? And when was the audition itself for Indianapolis?
It was at the end of September.
Okay. So so you're getting close to the audition anyway. So maybe just talk through how you budgeted your time and what activities you did in that time.
Sure. So when the season rolled around, I really kind of had a mental list of each excerpt, and the things that I felt were really important that I had to execute, and I really just kind of focused on all of the things that I felt like really needed to be in place. One of the other things I was thinking of was like Ein Heldenleben, the arpeggios, really making sure that every note is in tune and being able to execute that lick every time. Really, that kind of kept me busy enough. Of course you have to practice the Bach and the Kusevitsky as well. But just being able to how Robinson always talked about, if you play with a good sound and good intonation and good rhythm and just kind of fundamentals, you're gonna do well. You're gonna get to the finals. And so I think just to kind of do all that was kind of a project enough for me. And then of course, starting to, as it got closer to the audition, starting to put the kind of the icing on the cake, and making sure that things sound musical and it's a good presentation. In the summer, I spent a little bit more time just kind of living with each excerpt and just kind of working through it. I started to take lessons and play for people in the summer, even if I didn't feel prepared, which is always hard. You always want to kind of go to someone and play for them, and you want it to be like you're already in the final round, and I think that certainly has kept me from playing for people in the past. But I think we should just go for it and risk a little embarrassment or risk not sounding so great. And I mean, I think everyone that I've played for, there's everyone's so nice, in the bass community, and they point out things that you might not hear, and I think it can be really helpful. So
this episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. They proudly offer the largest variety of fine basses and bows in the Southeast. You can find something at every price point by makers such as Thomas Martin, Bill Lakeberg, Romano Solano, Lemur Music, all Shen models, K, Epiphone, and bows by Louis Morizot, Fuchs, Nürnbergo, Arcos Brazil, and others. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. Every violin shop has its own unique origin story, and here's A440's Michael Spadero on how the shop got started.
My mother-in-law started this business in 1982, and she was a professional cellist. But the story she told me was that Camille, my sister-in-law, is violinist with the LA Phil. Mm-hmm. And when she was maybe in high school, her violin was being repaired in a shop. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, the shop owner had some legal problem where, like, the Cook County Sheriff or someone confiscated all the stuff.
Okay.
So the only way for my mother-in-law to get her daughter's violin back was to buy all the contents of the shop at a police auction.
Okay. Wow.
So since she had all these instruments, I think that's what initially made her start a shop.
It's a great shop. I've gone there for years, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Michael. And folks, check them out at a440violinshop.com. My daily companion for practicing is the app Modacity. I love it so much, and the interface is so simple. You open it up, and you see a microphone and a timer. And here is Modacity founder Mark Gelfo on why you see that in the interface.
It comes down to practice efficiency. And practice efficiency, the way that I think about it, is an equation with 3 different variables. One of them is learning milestones, one of them is retention, and the other is time. I define practice efficiency as learning milestones times retention divided by time spent.
Modacity has helped my practicing so much, and so many other people I know. You can learn more at modacity.co and visit our site for a special offer on lifetime access to this app. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. In terms of recording yourself, is that something you would do on a daily basis or every once in a while? And when you did record, would you just record an excerpt, or would you record a run of a mock audition, or how? And then when would you listen back to it? People are always asking about how that plays in. What did you do?
I probably did a mix. I probably, sometimes I would play an excerpt and I would record the excerpt. I would go back and listen to it. Then I would say, okay, this doesn't sound that great, or this sounds like it sounds slower than I thought, or whatever. And so then I would go back and work on the excerpt a little bit. And I think closer to the audition, I would run through like either the whole list or a section of the list, do like a mock. And so I was listening to some of my recordings recently from that audition, and there was 55 minutes of music. So I was like, yeah, I think I ran through most of the list there. So yeah, kind of a mix, I think was helpful.
I remember talking to Alex Hanna just about getting ready for the Chicago Symphony principal audition, and the thing that he brought up multiple times was just like trying to avoid burnout, you know. And I think that Detroit either might have been on strike or they were just off for a big part of his preparation, so he had some uninterrupted time too. But still, like just avoiding grinding these excerpts, you know, too much or losing that spark or anything. Or how did you handle that? Was it an issue for you? What did you do to avoid burning out in that months long process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see. I think if you have time during the day to kind of set up a practice schedule where you can kind of spread out the practice, I found that to be helpful. Just to step back for a second, one of the things, you know, like I'm 37, and so taking an audition kind of later, you know, I don't know, then right out of school, physically, I have found this past audition to be a little bit more demanding and taxing. So I think I was more aware of trying to take good breaks. You know, I would mostly practice maybe around an hour, maybe a little less, and then either take, you know, a 20-minute break, or just, you know, move on to something else that I was working on during the day, and then come back to practice. I think is really helpful from a physical standpoint. You know, giving yourself time to stretch and to rest, and, you know, just to lay down for a little bit, you know, or to go and do some exercise if that's what if you're into that. I think you know, one of the things that I like to do is just I like to listen to music a lot, and usually it's not classical music, you know. So I listen to a lot of music, you know, read books, read fun books. You know, I think all those things can be really helpful in terms of just having like a good emotional, mental state, you know, leading up to an audition to avoid burnout.
Yeah. Some people, no matter how their preparation has been laid out, when they get to the preliminary day, the semifinal day, the finals, you know, they kind of spin out of control. They over practice, or they freak out, or like how do you deal with those? You know, this audition is close to you, or close to where you were living, so it might have been different than hopping on a plane with a travel trunk and going across the country. I'm assuming you didn't fly to Indy, but you know, right. but either in a previous experience where you were flying, or like for this audition, like what are some strategies you have and had for just kind of staying on your game? Because those can be long days, you know, those prelim, semifinal days, and that just keeping your game on can be a real major challenge.
It can be, for sure. And, you know, I think most of us as musicians, we are aware of things that maybe aren't at the highest level in our playing. You know, we show up at the audition and we're thinking, gosh, I still can't get that A flat in tune, you know, for the Beethoven, you know, or sometimes I get it and sometimes I don't. And so we start to get really stressed, and maybe we start to practice too much, you know, the day of the audition or at the audition. And so, I mean, I think one thing that can be helpful is, you know, prepare as much as you can before the audition. And then when you're at the audition, or maybe a few days before the audition, try to take it easy. Try not to play too much, practice too much when you're there, so that you feel fresh. And, you know, just think, you know, I have practiced the best I can. I've prepared as much as I can. I'm just going to go out there and do the best I can and see where it goes, you know.
This is the question David Allen Moore asked me to ask, and so I will ask it now. Because he said, especially when you talk to someone who's had a successful audition, and there are all these people listening that are on that trail, and they don't get the audition, and they get cut, and just that picking yourself up and dusting yourself off. I remember vividly driving from Memphis, Tennessee, back to Chicago, and there was this Kansas City audition, and I really didn't want to take it. I was like not ready, but I thought I'm going to stop off and take it because I want my deposit back, And so I went. I was not ready. Took it totally, just did not audition well and left, and I was just like feeling so low. And I remember just like trying to get out of that funk, and what a struggle that was. I'm assuming you haven't won every audition you've ever taken.
No. I have not.
So what have you found helpful, just for like, because you can sort of get into the spiral of negative thinking, what have you found helpful for yourself, just in terms of like picking yourself up and moving forward when things don't go your way?
That's a good question. I think, dealing with some of the, I've certainly been to a number of auditions that I haven't won. I've had kind of all levels of, haven't made it out of the prelims, made it to the semifinals, but didn't advance, made it to the finals, but didn't, Yeah. So there's different levels of, of success, as it were, at auditions. One of the things that I found interesting when I was in Louisville, I was on a number of audition committees, being a principal string player, and I was even asked to be on like a flute audition and a clarinet audition, and I had to ask my colleagues what am I looking for, but I think auditions can be a subjective process as well as being objective. We think of the objective things like executing the licks and having a good sound and good intonation and that kind of thing. But I think they can also be subjective in the terms of, different committee members can be looking for different things or have different opinions about what they think is important. So, I think, if one thing that can be a comforting thought is that if you're having success at some auditions or not or and then not having success at some auditions, it can be like, well, there are kind of different opinions out there about your playing, and some people might have liked you and some people might not have liked you, so I don't know. I guess that can be kind of helpful in the sense of just understanding how auditions work, and just because you didn't advance doesn't mean, that you should pack it up and do something else.
Yeah. Yeah, having that perspective from behind the screen has got to be great for just understanding the nuances of what's. And I remember I've had way less experience than you have, obviously. But I was on a few auditions for the Elgin Symphony in Chicago, and I remember like listening and taking notes and like looking back at my notes and thinking like, man, I'm a jerk. Like I'm like, but I wasn't. It was just that you're in that moment, and it's just so objective. Like you were saying earlier, got that A flat in the Beethoven 5 or you didn't, or this, or
right.
Wanted to do it slow, move it faster and it didn't work, or whatever, so yeah, I think I'm sure that having that perspective from the other side gives you some deeper understanding of just that how things that could feel like they're nobody's trying to like personally insult you, by not advancing. It's just the process.
Right. That's right. Mm-hmm.
So let me phrase it this way. So a lot of people would see, so you get into Louisville, principal bass, out of Curtis, and then you're in there, and then now you've gotten into Indy. That's sounds like a great career. if you could go back to those Curtis years, let's say, 20-year-old, 19, 20-year-old Bert, something like that. Knowing what you know now, give young Bert some wisdom. Could be about auditions, could be about, you name it. What would you tell young Bert?
Oh boy. Oh boy. I don't know. There'd be so much, I think. I think maybe I would say, when you're younger, I think it's a good time to try to make a big push to get where you want to be in your career, because as you get older, it does become a little bit more there are more dynamics at play in life decisions and that kind of thing, so that would probably be my main advice.
Bert, thank you so much for chatting. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Bert. I love talking with everybody I have on the show, but I love talking with people who are in Bert's position where they just won an audition and they've gone through this process, and especially winning an audition when you are already holding down another job, not when you're in school, but when you have all those demands. I think those are interesting topics, and whether or not you're taking auditions right now, and I am not, I learn a lot about just how to manage my own life in the process. So thanks, Bert, and thank you for listening. And if you want to get in touch, feedback at Contrabass Conversations will put you in touch with me. And everybody we have on the show these days is a result of someone getting in touch, whether it's through email, just like I said there, or through our Facebook group, contrabassconversations.com/community. We'll take you there, or just search for us on Facebook, or many other ways, Instagram and Twitter, and you name it, our app. We have lots of ways for you to get in touch, and I'd love to hear from you. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, we've been going full force putting out new content there. I've been having a blast doing that. So if you want to learn more about bass methods or practicing or anything else, more short form, not these hour-long conversations, but more like 3 to 8 minute videos, check it out. It's all linked up in the show notes and at our website, contrabassconversations.com. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. And Mitch is making beautiful award-winning basses in the Dallas area, Kilgore, Texas. Look him up at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and before I depart, Krista Copper has been going through and archiving every single episode. She has gone through every episode of this podcast, 625 plus, and recorded what we've talked about on this podcast and when, and that allows us to assemble all of this recorded bass history into future projects. We've done some, we've got many more in the future. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we'll see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.